The night was dark, and the storm had left a trail of destruction in its wake, but the real storm was about to begin. Inside the hallowed walls of the Escorial, a massive palace and monastery, a man named Montano was about to become the center of a different kind of tempest. Montano, the librarian of the Escorial, was a man of many secrets. Some said he had traveled to the Netherlands and picked up dangerous ideas that went against the church. Whether these rumors were true or not, they had a profound impact on a young monk named José de Sigüenza. Sigüenza, a historian and a monk, was known for his deep faith and his love for learning. But in 1592, everything changed. Montano, who had been a mentor to Sigüenza, was accused of having unorthodox views on religion. These accusations weren't just about Montano. They were also a way to attack Sigüenza indirectly. Sigüenza's colleagues, who were jealous of his growing influence and Montano's support, decided to strike. They denounced Sigüenza to the Inquisition, the powerful and feared religious court. The Inquisition moved quickly. Sigüenza was summoned to stand trial, and for 3 months he was questioned, his every word and action scrutinized. The trial was intense, but in the end Sigüenza was exonerated. He was innocent, but the damage was done. The fear of the Inquisition had cast a shadow over his life, and he knew that he could never fully trust his colleagues again. But Sigüenza's trial was not an isolated incident. Across Spain, other intellectuals were facing similar challenges. One of the most famous was Francisco Sanchez, known as El Brocens, a professor of grammar at the University of Salamanca. In 1584, Brocens was denounced to the Inquisition for his bold and sometimes controversial views on theology. The Inquisition, known for its strict adherence to orthodoxy, was not lenient. Brocens was summoned to the tribunal in Valladolid, and the tribunal voted to have him arrested and his property seized. However, the Suprema, the highest authority of the Inquisition, intervened and reduced the sentence to a severe reprimand. Brocens, a man with a fiery temper and a sharp mind, was not deterred. He continued to challenge the dominant theological views, even going so far as to express contempt for Thomas Aquinas and the Dominicans. In 1593, at the age of 80, Brocens found himself in trouble once more. Reports of his lectures reached the tribunal, and in 1596, the Inquisition began proceedings against him. It took until 1600 for any action to be taken, but when it did, Brocens was placed under house arrest, and his papers were seized. One of the charges against him was that he refused to submit his understanding to the faith in matters that were not directly related to it. Brocens, humiliated and in poor health, died in December 1600. The University of Salamanca, in a display of the deep-seated fear of the Inquisition, denied him the funeral honors he deserved. These cases were not just about individual conflicts, they were part of a larger pattern. The Inquisition, while not always the initiator of these conflicts, often became the tool used by rivals to silence their opponents. In many cases, the accused were of converso origin, meaning they or their ancestors had converted from Judaism to Christianity. This added a layer of anti-Semitic sentiment to the proceedings. For example, when the famous poet and scholar Louis de Leon heard about the arrest of his colleague Gaspar de Grajal, he wrote to a friend, expressing his shock and the fear it instilled in others. He even joked, in a lecture, about speaking softly to avoid the inquisitors, a joke that highlighted the pervasive fear of the Inquisition. The historian Mariana, in his writings, captured the mood of the time. He described the anxiety and dissatisfaction that many felt when learned and respected individuals were forced to defend themselves in prison. He wrote that the fear of speaking freely and the risk of being accused of heresy led many to either remain silent or to conform to the prevailing orthodoxy. The fear was real, and it affected not just those who were accused, but everyone who valued intellectual freedom. The University of Salamanca, a center of learning and debate, was a microcosm of the broader conflict between different approaches to knowledge and faith. The Inquisition, often siding with the conservatives, played a role in these conflicts, but it was not the only force at play. Anti-Semitic sentiments, rivalry among scholars, and the fear of heresy all contributed to the tensions. Even the great Saint Teresa of Avila, a reformer and a mystic, faced scrutiny. Her autobiography, which contained her spiritual experiences, attracted suspicion, and she was denounced to the Inquisition. However, she was never seriously persecuted, and her faith and resilience saw her through the difficult time. The cases of Montano, Sigüenza, Brosens, and others show that the Inquisition, while a powerful institution, was not the sole enemy of intellectual freedom. The fear of heresy and the desire to maintain orthodoxy were widespread, and the Inquisition was often just one part of a larger system of control. The story of these intellectuals, their trials, and their resilience is a testament to the complex and often turbulent world of early modern Spain. In the 1580s, a man named Diego Pérez de Valdivia, who was of converso origin, faced a significant challenge. Conversos were Jewish or Muslim individuals who had converted to Christianity, often under pressure, and their conversion was often met with suspicion and prejudice. Pérez was accused by the Inquisition of saying that conversos were better people than non-conversos, and that it was a sin to believe in racial purity. Despite this, the incident was quietly dropped, and Pérez went on to have a successful career as a religious writer, reformer, and preacher in Barcelona, supported by bishops, the Inquisition, and the clergy. This case, and others like it, highlight the complex relationship between conversos and the broader society. For centuries, there has been a debate about the impact of the Inquisition on Spanish culture and intellectual life. On one side, historians like Henry Charles Lee and Americo Castro argue that the Inquisition was responsible for Spain's intellectual backwardness, claiming it stifled creativity and learning. They believed that the Inquisition's severe repression of thought led to the decline of Spanish literature and science. On the other side, conservative voices, including the young scholar Marcelino Menéndez y Pelayo, defended Spain's cultural achievements. Menéndez y Pelayo pointed out that some of the greatest works of Spanish literature were produced during the time of the Inquisition, including the masterpieces of Miguel de Cervantes, the rich mysticism of Saint Teresa of Avila, and the vibrant theater of Lope de Vega. He argued that the Inquisition did not eliminate learning in Spain, and that the idea of Spain as a nation of barbarians was a myth created by liberal opponents. The Index of Banned Books, which the Inquisition used to control what people could read, is often cited as evidence of the Inquisition's oppressive nature. However, the reality was more complicated. Many of the books listed in the index were obscure and not available in Spain. The index was also expensive and difficult to enforce, leading to banned books being sold in bookstores even years after they were listed. Moreover, the Inquisition's control over books in Spanish was minimal, and many Spanish works, including those on science, navigation, and natural history, were not affected. The impact of censorship on Spanish literature and science is a topic of ongoing debate. Some argue that writers practiced self-censorship, using coded language to avoid persecution. However, this theory is not universally accepted. Despite the Inquisition's attempts at control, the book trade in Spain continued to function, and many Spanish works were widely read and appreciated both within and outside Spain. The Inquisition's impact on science was also limited. While it did ban some works on astrology and alchemy, which were seen as superstitious, it did not significantly hinder scientific progress. Spain's contributions to fields like navigation, geography, and natural history were highly valued in Europe. Foreign experts and texts also continued to influence Spanish science, and the discovery of the New World brought new knowledge and perspectives that stimulated intellectual activity. In the end, the debate over the Inquisition's impact on Spanish culture and intellectual life remains a complex and nuanced topic. While it is clear that the Inquisition had some negative effects, it is equally evident that Spain's cultural and scientific achievements during this period were significant and should not be overlooked. In the 11th century, the tide began to turn against the Muslims in Spain. The Pope called for a crusade in 1095, and Christian princes from France and Burgundy joined the kings of Castile and Aragon to fight against the Muslims. In 1085, they captured Toledo, and in 1212, a combined Christian force defeated the Almohads at Las Navas de Tolosa, ending their control in the peninsula. By the mid-13th century, the Muslims only held the Kingdom of Granada. When Ferdinand and Isabella became king and queen in 1474, they decided to continue the fight against the Muslims. The war against Granada was seen as a holy crusade, supported by the Pope, and Christians from all over Europe joined in. The war began in 1482, and had a mix of chivalry and brutality. For example, after capturing Malaga in 1487, the Christians enslaved the entire population of 15,000 people. This war also inspired chivalric novels like Amadis de Gaula, but beneath the chivalry, there was a deep-seated intolerance, as seen in Cardinal Cisneros' brutal conquests in Africa. The war against Granada lasted 10 years and ended in 1492 with the kingdom's surrender. The Muslims, now called Moors or Mutigeres, became a minority in a Christian country. The terms of the surrender were supposed to be generous. The Mutigeres were allowed to keep their customs, property, laws, and religion. They could even have their own officials, though these would be supervised by Castilian governors. Those who wanted to leave could do so. However, the reality was different. Many of the Muslim elite found life under Christian rule unbearable and moved to North Africa. The reorganization of Granada was given to Inigo López de Mendoza, and Hernando de Talavera was appointed as the first archbishop. Talavera tried to convert the Muslims gently, using charitable persuasion and respecting their culture, but progress was slow. In 1499, Cardinal Cisneros asked Ferdinand and Isabella for permission to take a harder approach. He believed that the Mutigeres had forfeited their rights by rebelling and should be given a choice between baptism or expulsion. Some, including Cisneros and Tendilla, favored harsh measures. Cisneros wanted to convert the Muslims and make them slaves, believing this would pacify the land. Ferdinand, however, preferred a more moderate approach. He said, "If your horse trips up, you don't kill him, you give him a gentle push to keep going. So we should baptize these Moors. If they don't become Christians, their children and grandchildren will." This difference in approach showed how Ferdinand and Isabella would handle the Muslims differently in Castile and Aragon. In Granada and Castile, they believed that circumstances required forced conversions. In Aragon, where the Muslims were fewer and less of a threat, they didn't see the need for such harsh measures. In 1499, a revolt broke out in the Albaycin, the Muslim quarter of Granada. The rebellion spread to other parts of the south and lasted until early 1501. The government had to decide how to respond. Some, like Tendilla and Cisneros, wanted to use force, while others, like Ferdinand, wanted to be more lenient. In the end, the government decided to offer the Mutigeres a choice: convert to Christianity or leave Spain. This decision marked a turning point for the Muslims in Spain. They were no longer a nation but a minority in a Christian country, and their future was uncertain. The forced conversions and the option to leave would change the face of Spain forever. In the early 1500s, the Kingdom of Granada, once a thriving center of Islamic culture, began to change dramatically. The Mutigeres, Muslims who had lived under Christian rule, were forced to convert to Christianity or leave their homes. Many chose to stay and convert, becoming known as Moriscos, or Christian Muslims. They were given the same legal rights as Christians, but faced many restrictions. For example, they were not allowed to carry weapons and were pressured to give up their cultural practices. In 1501, a massive bonfire was held in Granada, where thousands of Arabic books were burned. This was a clear sign that the old ways of Muslim life in Spain were coming to an end. Isabella, the Queen of Castile, decided that all Muslims in her kingdom should become Christians. In 1502, she gave the Mutigeres a choice: convert to Christianity or leave the country. Most of them chose to convert, as leaving was nearly impossible due to the strict conditions set by the government. This meant that Islam was no longer openly practiced in Castile, except in the Crown of Aragon, where the King, Ferdinand, allowed the Muslims more freedom. However, the Moriscos were not truly accepted as equals. From 1511 onwards, they were subjected to new laws that aimed to change their way of life. They were told to stop speaking Arabic, change their clothing, and abandon Islamic customs. In 1526, a meeting in Granada made these rules even stricter, and the Inquisition, a powerful church court, was moved to the city to enforce them. In the Crown of Aragon, the situation was different. The nobles there needed the Moriscos as cheap labor on their estates, so they were allowed more freedom. The king, Ferdinand, even told the Inquisition not to persecute the Moriscos in Aragon. This led to a saying among the nobles: "More Muslims, more profit." In 1520, a rebellion broke out in Valencia, led by a group called the Germanians. These rebels baptized thousands of Muslims to free them from their noble lords. Even though the baptisms were forced, the authorities decided to keep the Moriscos as Christians. By 1526, King Charles V ordered all remaining Muslims in the Crown of Aragon to convert to Christianity. From then on, all Muslims in Spain were officially Moriscos. The Moriscos were spread across Spain, but the highest concentration was in Granada, where they made up about 54% of the population. In Valencia, they were about 1/3 of the population, and in Aragon, about 1/5. In other parts of Spain, like Castile, they were much fewer. The Moriscos were a diverse group. In Granada, many belonged to a wealthy upper class and spoke Arabic. In Valencia, they were mostly poor farmers who lived separately from Christians and kept their customs. In other areas, they spoke Spanish and lived more like their Christian neighbors, but they still practiced Islam in secret. Despite being treated as second-class citizens, the Moriscos had their own economic life. Many worked as farmers, but some were also craftsmen, traders, and even professionals like lawyers and doctors. They had their own communities, called aljamas, which helped them maintain their identity and culture. They even had their own language, Aljamia, a form of Spanish written in Arabic script, which the Inquisition couldn't read. The Inquisition tried to force the Moriscos to truly become Christians, but it was a difficult task. The Moriscos resisted, and many continued to practice Islam in secret. In 1526, the Moriscos in Valencia made a deal with the king and the Inquisition, agreeing to convert but asking for protection from prosecution for 40 years. However, this deal was short-lived, and the Inquisition continued to persecute them. The situation became even more tense in the 1570s. The Moriscos in Granada rebelled, leading to a major conflict. Despite this, there were still many places where Christians and Moriscos lived together peacefully. In some towns, like Arcos de Medinaceli, Moriscos and Christians shared political and social life, attending each other's funerals and working together. The Moriscos faced a difficult choice. They could either fully convert to Christianity or continue to practice Islam in secret. Some religious leaders, like a mufti in Oran, advised them to outwardly conform to Christianity while secretly maintaining their faith. This practice, called taqiyya, allowed them to survive, but it also created a complex and sometimes confusing identity. By the end of the 16th century, tensions were rising, but there were still many who believed that Christians and Moriscos could live together. A popular romance, Abencerrage y Jarifa, even told a story of love between a Christian and a Muslim. Some Moriscos even believed that people of different religions could coexist and find truth in their own ways. However, the Moriscos' resistance to full assimilation remained a significant issue. They were not willing to give up their culture and religion, which made it difficult for them to be fully accepted by the Christian majority. This tension would eventually lead to more conflicts and, ultimately, to the expulsion of the Moriscos from Spain in the early 17th century. The story of the Moriscos, the Muslims who remained in Spain after the end of Muslim rule, is a tale of struggle, resistance, and cultural conflict. For centuries, the Moriscos tried to hold onto their heritage and faith, even as the Spanish crown and the Catholic Church pushed them to abandon their traditions and convert to Christianity. In the early 1500s, some figures, like Archbishop Talavera of Granada, tried to bridge the gap between the Moriscos and the Old Christians. Talavera encouraged Moriscos to sing Arabic hymns during Mass, and even participated in traditional dances like the Zambra. However, this approach was short-lived. As the years passed, the pressure to assimilate intensified. Christian nobles like the Count of Tondela argued for tolerance, but their voices were often drowned out by the growing demand for cultural conformity. By the 1520s, it was clear that the early missionary efforts were largely unsuccessful. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, visited Granada in 1526 and was told that despite 27 years of supposed conversion, very few Moriscos had truly become Christian. In regions like Granada and Valencia, the Moriscos continued to practice their religion, observe prayers, and follow Islamic customs. This cultural and religious resistance led to frequent tensions and conflicts with the Old Christians, particularly over issues like dress, food, and language. The Moriscos were often forced to live in separate communities, which only deepened the divide. Even in places where they were more integrated, like some parts of Castile, they faced constant suspicion and discrimination. For example, the town of Hornachos, which was almost entirely Morisco, chose to emigrate to Morocco in 1610 rather than continue living under such oppressive conditions. Despite the challenges, there were attempts to catechize the Moriscos and bring them into the fold of Christianity. Missionaries, including Franciscans and Jesuits, were sent to Valencia and Granada. Archbishop Juan de Ribera of Valencia, in particular, made significant efforts to reach out to the Moriscos, founding a seminary and a college for Morisco children. However, the Moriscos, supported by the principle of dissimulation, remained steadfast in their faith, often maintaining their Islamic practices in secret. The nobles, who often had economic interests in keeping the Moriscos under their control, frequently clashed with the Inquisition. For example, the Duke of Segorbe and the Admiral of Aragon, Sancho de Moncada, both protected their Morisco vassals from inquisitorial persecution. This conflict between the nobles and the church only added to the Moriscos' difficulties. The situation came to a head in 1568, when the Moriscos of Granada revolted against the harsh policies of the crown. The rebellion was brutal, and both sides committed atrocities. The Spanish crown responded with severe repression, leading to the forced expulsion of thousands of Moriscos from Granada to other parts of Spain. This only spread the Islamic presence in regions like Castile, where it had not been as strong before. The Moriscos' resistance continued, and they became a significant focus of Inquisition prosecutions. In the 1570s, the Inquisition in regions like Aragon and Valencia increasingly targeted the Moriscos, leading to a sharp rise in the number of prosecutions. Despite this, the Moriscos remained proud of their Islamic heritage and continued to fight to preserve their culture. Even in the midst of this conflict, there were moments of coexistence and cooperation. In some areas, like La Sagra and the province of Cuenca, Christians and Moriscos lived together peacefully. Some Moriscos, like Alonso del Castillo and Miguel de Luna, even tried to bridge the gap between the two cultures by presenting what they claimed were ancient Arabic Christian texts. Though these texts were later proven to be forgeries, they reflected a desire to find common ground. The story of the Moriscos is a complex and often tragic one. It is a reminder of the challenges of cultural and religious integration, the power of community and tradition, and the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. Despite the centuries of struggle, the Moriscos left an indelible mark on the history of Spain, a legacy that continues to be remembered and studied today.